All right, what's up, Dragon Brood? We got multiple new products and cards and everything announced from MagicCon Amsterdam. And honestly, there were two new things that kind of went a little under the radar, but might be big impacts later this year. One is Foundations, the other is that we're actually bringing Archenemy back as part of the Commander stuff. So let's talk about both those things. I want to talk about what they are, some concerns, but also the positives. I'm going to start with the Archenemy stuff because this is probably less to go into and it's more straightforward and less speculative. But when you go to buy your Duskmourn commander decks, they will come with extra oversized cards that will be used to play Archenemy. And for those of you who don't know what that is, you will actually play 3-on-1. And the cool part about this is they updated the rules as well. So if you have played Archenemy before, there are a few things that are different. Now, those oversized cards are what they call schemes, and they look like this. And some of them, well, they all have things that trigger that turn. Some stick around a little bit longer until you do the thing that makes them go away. But the Archenemy gets one of those every turn. They've also changed it to where now the Archenemy has 60 life, which is really cool. And the players now share 60 life, so you kind of win and lose together. It also is built so nobody's really singled out, which is sort of what happened before, where a player would get eliminated and you're just sitting around waiting for like 45 minutes for the game to be over. So this is actually a pretty cool change that I think benefits this style of play a whole lot. So it's kind of cool to see this coming back. I don't know what this will do for the price of old schemes if people want to build new Archenemy decks, but I'm sure they'll have some value, or at least have some chase value that people may go after. But it's cool that there's at least going to be new stuff, and you should have a playable set just from buying the Duskmourn Commander decks. Now let's get into Foundations a little bit here. This is kind of tough because we know a little bit and we've seen a few things, but we're kind of having to speculate a lot as well. So keep that in mind as we talk about this product. But basically, it sounds like it's going to be a core set of sorts, where it's going to bring stuff, as they've made it sound, from across the multiverse, a bunch of different cards that we're familiar with, and some new cards, which again kind of sounds like a core set. But the interesting thing here is they've said these cards should be legal until at least 2029. And I want you to hold on to that wording. We're going to come back to that in a little bit. But that's kind of all we got in the initial announcement, other than it'll be available in game stores and you'll be able to play with the cards in Arena. And they release November 15th. So that's kind of what we know about the product itself. And we did get some previews for Foundation, and I'll highlight a couple of them here. But Omniscience is kind of a crazy card. Interesting that they wanted this to be one that comes back. You get to cast spells from your hand without paying their mana cost. It's an enchantment. It costs a ton, but there's a lot of ways to trick this into play. We did get 9 Lives Familiar, which is pretty cool. It's a 3 mana 1/1. When it enters the battlefield with 8 revival counters on it, and then when it dies, you remove a revival counter and return it to the battlefield, which is actually pretty sweet. And there's already some silly combos people have thought about that you could do with this card. Anthem of Champions I like because it's very straightforward. It's just a green and white. All your creatures get +1/+1. It's an enchantment. I like cards like this for this type of set because it's going to be very easy to understand, very clean. And then, of course, Llanowar Elf was in the promo or in the preview article. I'll say this too, that knowing Llanowar Elf exists, other cards will also have to exist to keep up with the speed of potential decks, as well as the idea that stuff like Day of Judgment, which they also said are going to be in the set. So having decks be a turn faster are kind of okay with Day of Judgment existing, and this will be the second 4 mana Wrath we have available in Standard anyway during that time. So kind of interesting. But as of now, those are the only cards we know about. But let's talk about some of those concerns and also why I think a product like this possibly exists. Now, if you're in WotC's shoes, one of the things they're trying to solve for getting people interested in Standard, which is important because it sells new cards, it's an easy jumping on point, there's less cards for people to learn them. So like the whole format is actually a benefit if you can get people to play it from a business standpoint. But you need the format to exist a little bit longer than 2 years. And I have to admit, I wasn't sure how 3-year Standard was going to work, but if you get the last year's worth of Standard, it's been really good. Like, even where there's problematic cards like Shieldred that we don't particularly like, They're not dominating anything. They're not showing up in like half the top 8 decks or anything like that. And you actually get a pretty good spread of decks in most top finishes in various tournaments that you're seeing. So credit to them, 3-year standard, the balance is there and it's working. Hopefully that continues. But then Foundations has that interesting thing that it says it'll be standard legal till at least 2029. So that means it's going to be 5 years for that while everything else is 3. And that feels a little weird and a little off kilter, but I started thinking about it. Like if you're coming back to the game, if it has a bunch of cards, now again, this is speculation because we don't know, but I'm assuming the set's going to be at least 70-30, 70 old cards, 30% new cards. So I think that would make sense. It could even be 80% old cards, 20% new, which would be even better. But if it's majority old cards, then somebody coming back to the game is already going to be familiar with a bunch of cards they can play in standard, right? So while they're learning new cards to build decks with, there's going to be a base of stuff that they're already comfortable with, which is kind of a good move if you're trying to draw people back to the format. But then you also have the other side of the issue that if somebody were to quit playing temporarily because, I don't know, life takes over, job change, maybe they have to buckle down for a couple years in school, whatever it is, and they come back, even though a rotation may have happened where some of the cards they did know rotated out of standard, well, they still have a base of cards that are still going to be around for another year or 2 years that they already own probably, so they can hop right back in and build a deck based on those. So it's kind of an interesting idea to have something like this exist for multiple different groups. But then there's the other part, and this is why I wanted to hold on to the wording of these cards will be legal till at least 2029. And the at least is interesting because it sounds like, or at least the assumption I'm making here, is that when we get to 2029, there will be a new foundation set, probably good for another 5 years. And some number of these cards will, I guess, appear in that set as well. Some of them will probably rotate out or not be included again for a variety of reasons, I'm sure. But what I like about this is it does give them 5 years. So somewhere around year 3, they can start looking and say, okay, these cards are never being played, or these are too good, or they're showing up in too many things. And then they can plan to make those changes in the set that'll be coming out in 2 years. So I kind of like what's going on there, and conceptually, it's kind of neat. Now, this does muddy the messaging, though, a little bit, right? If you're coming back in and you're like, oh, how long is standard? It's 3 years. Oh, sweet. So you start scrolling back and you look at the 3 years worth of standard sets. And then they say, oh, wait, but hold on. This foundations thing, these are available for 5 years. Or maybe this foundation set, depending on when you start, came out to a year prior, and they're going to be standard legal for 4 years, so a year longer than the other cards you're buying. So that could be a little awkward to explain to somebody. Also, if you're having to just learn what standard is, it is a little weird to have some cards that are always around for 5 years and some that are rotating out for 3 years. So I don't like the unclear messaging, but I do like the intention of what we're trying to do with that. There is also the concern of availability, right? Like most Magic sets, for those you don't know, are only really printed for about a year and a half. Now, I don't know, I'm sure that's changed since we went to a 3-year standard, but let's say something's printed for up to 2 years. Well, are we going to continue to keep printing the foundation set for year 3 at least, maybe even into year 3.5 or 4? I don't know if WotC will want to do that or even keep the storage space in a warehouse for it or whatever the case may be. But they have shown that if something is selling well, they are willing to go back to print. We've seen that with the Warhammer 40k Commander decks. We've seen that with the Lord of the Rings set. So, like, they're willing to go back to print on things. So that probably isn't a problem here. But I will say another thing I found out that's really cool with Foundations is, I don't know if y'all remember the welcome decks that used to be these like 30 card decks that stores would get to be able to teach people how to play Magic and whatnot. Those are supposed to be coming back with the release of Foundations, which is actually really cool. I think that's one of the biggest benefits. That was such a good tool, helped so many different retailers teach people to play. They were cool to give away at conventions to give people like a shortcut to hop into the game. They were great to do demos with, so it's awesome to see that those are going to be back as well. I mean, if there's anything that really makes this tough, it's kind of the timing of things, right? Because we have Bloomborough at the first weekend of August, and then we have Duskmorn at the end of September / first week of October, kind of in that space. and then you have like 6 weeks, I guess, after that, and then you'll have foundations that you have to pick up. And I say have to pick up, but we might already own some of the cards, depending on what they put in the set. A bunch of these might already exist on Arena and Magic Online, so you may not need to pick a bunch of them up if you already own some or can craft them easily. So that's actually pretty cool too. So yeah, I don't know. This is going to be a little bit of a weird space because of the timing, how many people really need the cards or don't, what does the set look like? Like there's so many things that we could talk about, but like I said, a lot of it is going to be speculation at this point. But I guess really it's just how do I feel about the concept in the set overall? And, I don't know if I'm going to go a hard thumbs up, but I'm like a 3/4 thumbs up. It's pretty good as an idea. Like I said, some of the messaging is going to be weird. And until I see the cards they decide to include, because I'll admit, on the one hand, we saw the enchantment that was actually very simple and clean. But then we also had something like the Nine Lives Familiar that, while I think it's a cool card, it's not the type of card I would like included in what would be a 5-year standard legal entry level set, right? That's a thing that kind of, I don't know. We'll see. If there's more like the enchantment and the Llanowar Elves and the Day of Judgment, I'm in. If there's more like the Omniscience and the Nine Lives Familiar, I'm not going to be as happy about it. So there's still a lot to decide, and the verdict's going to be out until we see more cards. But right now, we're going to have our eyes set on Bloomburrow, and then, of course, Duskmourn. Then we'll get around to Foundations. And this is going to make the last quarter of the year really interesting with lots of stuff coming down the pipe. Also, meaning that Standard rolling into February the following year in 2025 is going to have a whole new look, and we're almost replacing as many cards as we removed in that window of time. So, yeah, it's going to be a wild time for Standard, but I'm into it. Now, that being said, we are looking forward to Bloomburrow, and that set's going to be way different than anything else we've had, which is pretty cool. But if you want to see what I'm hoping to see in Bloomburrow, I'm going to go ahead and link that here for you so you can check that out next. But that's all I have for you for now. We'll see you next time.